Well, good evening, everybody. We are finally back for another live stream. I appreciate everybody hanging in there over the last couple of weeks. I had to cancel the last one, as you probably all know by now. And, then I went out of town for a week on a session, an amazing session. I was up in New Jersey. Had an amazing time starting production on a new project. And I don't know if anybody saw a few of my social media posts. The studio I was working at had just, to say that they had a lot of gear is an understatement. There was so many amazing outboard gear and microphones and guitar amps. And yeah, we had a pretty awesome time shooting stuff out and figuring out kind of what our setups was going to be, and all the fun stuff about what we do was definitely uh, definitely part of that session. So the studio is up in New Jersey. Like I said, it's called Slam House, and Chester, the guy whose place it is, I was joking with him that I'm going to go back up there some point in the summer when the weather's nice and we can go have drinks by the pool. We're going to go up and we're going to do a 72-hour live stream where we shoot out every single piece of gear in his studio. And then we would go have naps and just leave the live stream running and see if there's a way we could have a bunch of different camera angles that people can kind of just check in and check out gear, and maybe figure out a way that people can call in through like session wire or something like that and start pumping signals through. I don't know. We got a bunch of crazy ideas, but yeah, it's going to be cool. We're probably going to do, it's not going to be 72 hours straight, but I think we're going to go, we're going to try to do a live stream from his studio sometime in the summer, and it's going to be guitar amp central. And we're just going to, I think he's got like 45 guitar amps or something like that. Just the best of the high gain heads. And so, yeah, we thought that would be a fun idea. So if you're into that, give me a thumbs up in the chat, or, just DM me or whatever and be like, yeah, that's something you guys would be interested in doing. Just shooting out a bunch of awesome amps that half of them I'd never even seen in person. You just read about them online or you hear certain guys using them. And yeah, it was pretty awesome. So really quickly, for any newcomers, if you want to participate in the chat, you have to subscribe to the YouTube channel, and it's a pretty low cost of entry. So just click on the subscribe button, and I think after 5 minutes, it will let you participate in the chat. The other bit of housekeeping before we get started is if you're not signed up for my newsletter, I send out a newsletter once a week. I try not to spam you guys. I always say that. I try not to spam you. I don't think I spam you, but just little tips and tricks. And when I have time and I can make some presets and samples and IRs and all that fun stuff, I like to try to give some of that stuff away. And so you got to be subscribed there. So head over to my website, chrisbaseford.com. There might be a link down in the description page below the video here. And the other big exciting news that I've been teasing you guys with for what seems like a year, well, it's going to be coming up on a year from when we actually did the session, but last June, I did a production workshop at the Armory Studios in Vancouver. This is before we left Vancouver and came down to Nashville. And it was a pretty amazing experience. We had a few students, interns, observants, attendees, whatever you want to call them. We had some people come in person and get to witness the entire session, but we also we filmed the entire thing. And so over the last 6 to 8 months, we've been slowly but surely editing all the footage together, and I'm going to be releasing an online course where you guys can basically get a similar experience to being there in person. And it's a little bit of a different concept than maybe some of the other stuff that's out there. This is supposed to replicate, as much as it can, kind of the way that I got started in my career. And I went to a production school, or an audio engineering school. Not really learning everything I needed to know to feel comfortable to go get my first studio job. And so I was kind of like unsure of what I needed to know and what I didn't. That being said, I knew the basics. And when you really start learning is when you actually get into a studio and get to work with other professionals who've been doing it and have probably worked with a bunch of other people and picked up tips and tricks from a bunch of different, people and projects and experiences and studios and all that stuff. And so the first probably good 6 months of my career was basically just being kind of a fly on the wall with a really amazing engineer at a really great studio, with a variety of bands, variety of producers, variety of writers and artists and all this stuff. And just watching and observing and seeing how things worked in real time, in a real studio, in a professional environment when we're actually making a real record. That's kind of one of the most valuable ways that I learned. And so this production workshop is kind of trying to give that experience. And so the course is going to be a lot of footage, and you can obviously work through it at your own pace. But we're also going to offer a tier of a purchase where there will be group calls with me, video calls, where you'll go through the first, let's say, 2 or 3 chapters, and then after 2 weeks, you and me, and we haven't decided on the number yet, 10, 15, 20 people are all going to get on a group video call together and go through questions. If there's any sort of clarification that's needed, if you just want to kind of talk through something that you learned, or want me to elaborate on, that's what that will be for. So my long-winded way of getting back to the newsletter, we are going to be opening up what we're going to be referring to as our beta launch, because we need some feedback. We want to make sure this thing is great before it kind of goes out for everybody else. In order to qualify to be, or invited to join the beta launch, which is going to be a limited number of people, you need to be subscribed to the newsletter, because that's where we're going to let you guys know that that's available. That's going to be the form. There's going to be a link in one of the newsletters for a form that you got to fill out. And so that's going to be kind of probably a month to maybe 6-8 weeks, whatever, ahead of when it's going to launch. So anyways, enough commercials and sales pitches and all that stuff. But anyways, I joke about that because I hate being a sales guy and I hate, promoting stuff, but I am really proud of what we've put together. And I do think there's a lot of real great benefit and value to basically seeing me produce a band from beginning to end, through the mix, everything. I even had a guest segment from one of my favorite mastering engineers. I guess you guys can probably guess who that is, where he mastered the song, and we got to do a little video call that will be included in the course, where he kind of talks a little bit about, what he was listening for and what he did and all that stuff. It was incredible. That alone for me was pretty fun. So, long story short, go to my website, sign up for the newsletter. If this production course is something that you're interested in, keep your eye out, and we're going to be doing the beta launch. And hopefully sooner than later, the whole thing will be out and everybody can buy it. Like I said, there's going to be tiers where you can just work at your own pace. And if you only want to just go straight to the mixing component, where you watch me mix a song top to bottom, which I don't think I've actually done on film or with anybody in the room from top to bottom. I don't think I've done that before. So that's actually might be a first. But anyways, or if you want to join along and have the video calls and be able to get some feedback and all the back and forth fun stuff. So, all right, shall we dig in? If everybody can just give me a thumbs up, make sure technology is my friend today. Let me know if you can hear me and everything's working. I forgot my laptop charger, so I can't have my laptop open the entire time showing me that we're actually still live. So don't let me talk here by myself for the next 2 hours when if the if the live stream disconnected. So every once in a while, just check in on the chat and just say, "Yep, all good here, still good." Let me know I'm not by myself, floating into the ether. So, all right, thanks everybody. Okay, we have a interesting topic today. And I actually put a video out the other day, just a little short teaser that was a snippet from one of my previous live streams where I talk a little bit about parallel drum buses and stuff like that. What's the best way to kind of intro this? Parallel compression has become an almost like de facto standard these days. And I think it's become so just part of everybody's setup, or it just seems like it's something that you just have to do. When I'm getting sessions from other people to mix, or if I'm talking to some of the producers that I work with that are sending me sessions that are, have rough mixes and everything's kind of intact, and I'm seeing all these parallel buses and stuff like that. I sometimes wonder whether or not, and when I say we, I'm including myself in this, because I think I get caught in the same thing sometimes, whereas I just like, oh yeah, that's status quo. I guess I got to do a parallel on whatever. Sometimes I wonder whether or not we're actually, clear or really understanding why we're doing it. And so I thought this would be an interesting live stream to kind of run through not only the setup process and maybe explain to some people who maybe don't know what parallel processing is, maybe just start from the beginning and explain what it is, explain how you would set it up, explain how I set it up, which might not be the way that everybody else sets it up, obviously. And then maybe do some comparisons and some examples, so that way you guys can actually hear kind of what it's doing, and then maybe spark some ideas for you guys to go onto your own rigs and try some stuff and see what works and see what doesn't. And so that being said, let's dig in. So one of the things I did, because I thought it would be really beneficial, is went and found this diagram or this picture online that just kind of shows a little bit about what parallel compression is. In this case, it's a compressor. Okay, so the compressor is not in line with the original signal. It's basically, and again, forgive me. I'm sometimes some of the vernacular I'm going to use might be like kind of old school traditional studio stuff, and maybe everybody might not be familiar with it. But on a patch bay, when you want to take one signal and turn it into, let's say, 3 or 2 or 3, I think most malts on a patch bay, I think, were 3. So you take a signal, and there would be most patch bays would have just kind of like a section on the patch bay that would be what we called malts. And that would split a signal off into 3 more parallel signals, or do whatever you wanted to do with it. So this here, some people refer to this as like a tap. You're taking a tap off of it. Some people, like myself, I would call that malt. Depending on how you're doing it, you might have that come off of a send. But the long story short is the original signal stays untouched, and you're sending that original signal to another path, putting some sort of processing on it, in this case, a compressor, and then mixing them back together. And again, how you mix them back together, there's a variety of ways to do that. When we're working in the box, there's a bunch of plugins that kind of have some of this stuff built in, have ways to split signals and then merge them and sum them back together. But on a console, this is kind of what it would look like on a console. The alternative to this kind of parallel situation would be an insert. So an insert would be as if the compressor, there wasn't a tap here. The compressor was just on the original signal. So you got the original signal going into the compressor, it's doing the compression, and then the affected signal is coming out, and that's all you got. The thing that maybe starts to kind of just, I don't want to say confuse things a little bit, but it's actually great because a lot of the plugins don't have the limitations that analog did. And so a lot of plugins have a wet dry mix knob on them now, even a compressor or distortion units and stuff like that. Things that might have been traditionally just straight inserts now have a wet dry knob, like let's say a reverb or a delay. And really, when you think about it, reverbs and delays and all those things that you do sends and returns, those are also parallel. So if this said reverb instead of compressor, that's how probably 90% of people who are mixing set up their reverb effects units, is they send to it and then mix in and have it 100% wet, right? So anyways, that's why I say parallel processing. I don't just say parallel compression because it doesn't always have to be compression. I use, there's a plugin that I use that kind of simulates the Dolby A stretching thing. I run that in parallel. I've got like a sub-synth, like a BX or a DBX 120. It's the Brainworks sub-synth. I run that parallel. I'll run distortion plugins parallel. Obviously, reverbs, delays, pitch spreads, I'll run that parallel. Like all this stuff is basically parallel. And so that's why I refer to this as parallel processing. Really quickly, somebody mentioned in the chat to talk a little bit about the origin of this. And so as far as I know, there was like kind of a specific way that a parallel compression bus was kind of set up, probably in the 80s, maybe late 70s. I'm not sure on the timeline. You guys probably do some searches online and find out more. But it was called like the New York, not New York technique, but it was kind of like New York mixing processing. I don't know what they refer to it as, but it was kind of originated and was known for being a thing in New York, where they would do this. But then they would also crank a bunch of bottom end and top end EQ. So you just get this like uber hyped signal that they would then just feather in or mix in heavily with the original signal. And it would just give it this big pumping excitement, just like over the top. I often refer to like kind of how I like to mix as being a little like cartoony, like not real, like it doesn't necessarily have to sound super realistic. Gives it a little bit of this over the top artificial, like I said, cartoon. It's the best way I can describe it. And so as far as I know, it did originate in New York. I'm not sure who exactly was doing this first. I know some of my favorite mixers, this is a huge part of their sound. And it's something that I learned very early. The engineer that I started working for when I first got in the business, we had a Neve VR console, and the Neve VR had two different buses, almost like the SSL's got like the front bus and the back bus on like an old 4000. I think the VR had a 1, 2, 3, 4 bus. And so before I knew what this was, when I was doing mix recalls, I would see that the drums were, might be sending to 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then 3 and 4 would be sending to a compressor that would then be merged back into 1 and 2, which was your left and right. And I didn't really understand kind of what was going on, but it was just part of what I was hearing pretty much from the time I started working in a studio. And I've used some form of parallel compression or parallel processing aside from reverbs and delays like we just spoke about, but some sort of kind of hype parallel line. Like I said, it's kind of become just a standard, and I feel like for most people it has. So there is a real benefit to it. It's not one of those things where it's kind of where tonight we're going to bust a myth of parallel compression not being that great. It's pretty awesome. But knowing why you do it and then kind of figuring out how to set it up to achieve what you're looking to achieve is kind of what we're going to dig into today. So anyways, let's put away the diagram and let's dig in. And feel free, kind of while I'm talking, if you want to jump in the chat and ask questions, I'll try to keep an eye on it while I'm working. And if I don't get to it when I do stop for a chat, kind of a Q&A session, feel free to repost it. So let's have a peek at it before we jump in here. Yeah, somebody mentioned the KNS bus in Dan. You mentioned the KNS bus. Yeah, that's it's interesting. It's something we used to do at the chop shop, and then I kind of got out of it. I started actually, it started as a KNS bus, and then I started putting everything else into it, and then I was like, oh, this is now just a drum bus. It's not a KNS bus. KNS meaning kick and snare. It wasn't just a kick and snare. It was everything was going into it, and I was kind of balancing into it, and then it ended up just being like I was putting overheads in. I was putting little rooms in. I was doing all this stuff, and so then once I started mixing in the box, I just called it a drum parallel. A few years ago, when I was doing, I can't remember who I was mixing. Might have been a Scott Stapp record, but we basically what was happening was I was putting so much of the parallel drum bus, which for me, my parallel drum bus these days. So I'm just gonna I'll expand these so you guys can see them here. Make these jumbo. So here's my drum folder. I'll make that small. So how I have my session set up these days, I love routing folders. They're awesome. And so I've got all my drums in routing folders. And then all of these little sub routing folders feed my main drum routing folder. So if I expand all these, you'll see here are all my tracks, right? And then when I collapse those, all my kicks are going to a kick sub routing folder, snare, toms, cymbals, rooms, and then those are all going to the drum bus. They are also, you can see here, being sent to... they're also being sent to my drum parallel, send, and that's sending to this guy right here, which is an auxiliary return that just runs parallel. So what this does is it enables me to, it's a post fader following main pan send. And basically what this allows me to do is it basically just duplicates everything that's being sent to my drum bus, but on this auxiliary return. Now, I know I'm going to get some questions as to, well, why don't you just have your auxiliary return have the same input as your drum bus, and that way you don't have to have your sends. And here's the quick and easy and effective answer. If at any point in time I want to change the relative balance of my what's going into my drum parallel, I can trim. It's not going to be a completely different level because it's not pre-fader, but I can go in and let's say I don't want my rooms going into the drum bus. I can or my drum parallel. I can simply just mute it, and I can make it inactive, like that. Or let's say I'm liking everything about what's going on, except the cymbals are just a little bit too loud and are making the parallel pump a little bit weird and bringing up all the ratty cymbal sound, the washy cymbal sound. I can just trim it down here. It's still going to follow my mix. It's just going to be trimmed down by whatever this amount is. And so that's way easier and way more effective than mid-mix having to go and set up this all over again because you don't want the same thing going to your parallel as is going to your main bus. Okay, so in addition, this is what I was getting at. Why did I get the KNS? Where did the KNS come from? So I like to use my parallel drum bus is mainly used to fill in the space and pump between the hits. So picture this. You've got kick and snare going boom, ga, boom, ga, boom, ga, boom, ga, right? There's boom, space, ka, space, boom, space, ka, space. Obviously, you've got the sustain or the tail or the decay of the drums. What I like to use my parallel for is a way to increase the length of the drum, or at least the perceived length of the drums, by filling in the space between those boom, ka, boom, ka, boom, ka. So I want boom, whoo, ka, whoo, boom, whoo, ka, whoo. And it's kind of, when I go whoo, I'm kind of like pumping in the compression. And so obviously it happens a lot faster and you don't hear it separate like that, but that's essentially what it's doing. So my parallel drum bus, I set up with a relatively fast attack. And it looks like in this particular case, I actually didn't even go the fastest attack. I rolled off at one, but most of the time it's either fastest attack or next fastest attack. And it's usually compressed pretty hard. So that way, when after the compressor releases, it gets louder. And so it's quick attack, quick release. So that way it hits, pulls down the transient, and then there's this push of volume coming back in as the compressor releases. That's what I use my parallel for. Not everybody uses their parallel for that. The problem that I was having was I was getting like 3/4 the way through a mix, maybe a little bit further, and I was liking the way everything was sounding, but because I loved the pump that the parallel compressor was giving me, I didn't want to change that, but I was starting to get just almost like the transients weren't loud enough of the kick and the snare mainly. I just needed those to kind of cut through and just kind of be more present. When I would start going and trying to make adjustment level adjustments on the kick and the snare, or EQ adjustments on the kick and the snare, it was changing too much. Literally all I wanted to do was just turn up the transient of the kick and the snare next to or on top of, or whatever you want to call it, what I already had. And so what I ended up doing was just making an additional parallel bus called KNS, because it's for kick and snare mainly. And I put that on its own send. And again, why put it on its own send? Why not just duplicate some of the busing? Well, because there is oftentimes, depending on what the kick and the snare are doing, where I might want to trim down the kick or the snare so that way it's hitting the compressor a certain way, or so one is a little bit more present in that third drum bus. So let me have a quick peek at the chat here, because I know I just gave a lot of information in a kind of a short period of time here. And forgive me if I skip over some of the questions that aren't super like relevant to what we're talking about. Please write them down or keep them in a notepad. And when we go to like wide open Q&A at the end, you can throw them in there. But somebody asked about what about parallel processing and mixing live songs? I mean, it doesn't matter whether they're live songs or whether they're not live songs. It's a matter of just like, why do you need parallel compression? If you can get everything that you're looking for without using parallel compression, then like I'd say simplify and go for it. For me personally, it just gives me the control. And when I start playing this track and we start like really digging into kind of what each part is doing, you'll see the control that you have. I almost use the faders of my parallel compressions almost as like tone knobs, or just like a parameter. So you can just quickly mix and match and get a balance of like, okay, how much of like the main kit do I want? How much sustain do I want? How much attack do I want? And having all these parallel lines on different faders for me just makes that a little easier. If it doesn't work for you, don't bother. If you can get everything you need out of just like one drum bus, awesome. But so it's less about like whether or not you're mixing live or whether you're mixing drums or guitars or vocals or whatever. It's about what are you lacking from just having your main sound, your original dry sound, and is using a second parallel bus or a signal and mixing that in. Does that solve your problem more so than, let's say, just putting an insert on? And that's what we're going to dig into some more. So, so it says, so like, for example, you did for San Quentin live at Nashville. I mixed the live album very similar how I would mix a studio album. I just wanted it to sound good to me and just sound balanced and sound exciting. Obviously, you're dealing with a little bit more leakage. You've got crowd microphones that I'm mixing in and stuff like that. So, I maybe I'm not putting as much into the parallel because the overheads and the cymbals were getting a little bit too washy from all the bleed from all the other stage noise. But for the most part, I'm kind of mixing it the same way. So, Jeremy, hold your question till the end. I'll come back to that. It's a great question. But I'm going to come back to it a little bit more at the end. When we'll do kind of like a wide open Q&A at the end here. Are you doing the parallel just to add more excitement to the drums, or is it to reinforce frequencies? For me, it's about like sustain and attack. So it's less about frequencies, and it's more about like the length, let's not say the length, the relative balance between the transient, the body of the body of, or the initial kind of decay of a drum, and then kind of like the simulated pump that you get from a fast attack, fast release compression that kind of makes the drums sound like it's longer. So, all right. Are those buses always in your template, assuming you use one, or are they put in as when needed? No. They're always in. And actually, that's a great question, because before we actually start playing something, I want to show you guys something else. Part of my template is having parallels for everything set up, ready to go, just in case I want to use them. And so if I unhide a few things here, you can now see, and before I pulled those, I opened up those, or unhid those tracks. If you've watched any of my other videos, I have 8 groups, 8 subgroups. And that's how all my groups are always kind of the same. I've got drums, percussion, bass. I have a guitar A, guitar B that gets separated based off of what the arrangement of the song is. Sometimes it's rhythms and leads. Sometimes it's heavies and cleans. Sometimes it's electrics and acoustics. It kind of depends on the arrangement of the song. I've got keyboards, lead vocals, background vocals. Those are my 8 groups. And so all those tracks that belong to those 8 groups go into a routing folder. And I'll just break them all out here so you can see. They go into a routing folder, and then the routing folder goes to either my mix bus, or if I'm using my summing amp, goes out to my summing amp, right? But I've also, part of my template, and I make them inactive and hide them, I've got a parallel percussion. I don't want to call it a bus, but it's essentially a bus. But I've got a parallel line, parallel return. Let's call it that. A parallel auxiliary return for my percussion, for my bass, for my guitars, both guitars, keys, basically for every group. So at any point in time, if I'm mixing, let's say a lead vocal, and I got the mix sounding great, and I've got the lead vocal up and it's sounding good, but it's just not quite, something's not quite right, and maybe I'm already kind of at the top of the fader, and I can't push any more level, I'll open up my lead vocal parallel, I'll turn it on, and now I've got all of my lead vocals that are going to this bus. I just have to turn these on, and now they're going to here as well. I don't want to have to set that up while I'm doing it, because if I have to take a few minutes and set it up, I'm probably just like, it's not a matter of being lazy or not, but tendencies are I want to make everything really easy and quick, so that way I don't pick the thing that's easy and quick, because everything's easy and quick. I pick the thing that's going to solve the problem the most. And I know a lot of people who are just like, it's a pain in the butt, especially if you're doing it over and over and over again. So I have them set up all ready to go from the beginning, and I usually just leave them hidden. Another thing that I will show you is I do the exact same thing within my drum groups. With each drum, each kind of subgroup. So I've got a parallel line for just my kick, ready to go in case I need it. I've got a parallel line for just my snare, ready to go just in case I need it. I've got a parallel line for my toms, a parallel line for my cymbals, and a parallel line for my rooms. They're ready to go. All I have to do is turn them on. I don't have to make them. I don't have to group them. I don't have to color them. I don't have to send nothing. Like they're all ready to go. And that's a big thing. So I highly recommend, just because you have it there doesn't mean you have to use it. And even still, taking that one step further, I start my mixes with my parallel drums and my KNS on, like, because I typically use them 95% of the time. But sometimes the faders are all the way down and I don't really ended up using them. Or maybe I used just the drum parallel and not the overall parallel and not the KNS. But they're always in my session ready to go. And so, yeah, that's a great question because I would have skipped right over that. And that's something that I did want to mention. I've got parallels for everything. I just very rarely use them all, let alone anything other than drums for a lot of the time. So. Okay. Yeah. Do you think your template is achievable in any modern DAW? Yeah, my template is like super simple. I mean, there's a lot of things set up, but it's relatively simple. I just have like kind of nested groups. It's kind of like a little bit of a pyramid of routing. So I go all of my multi-tracks into a subgroup. Sometimes that's within one of my kind of major food groups. I call them food groups, my drums and drums and bass and guitars and all that stuff. So yeah, I think you could probably build this out. And that being said, if anybody watching right now uses one of the other DAWs, something that I'm going to be trying to put together for the course is have multi-tracks in each DAW kind of set up, ready to go. So I might need to recruit some people to help me set that up. So shoot me an email or a DM or something if you use one of the other Cubase or Logic or anything like that, and you'd be interested in taking one of my templates and converting it into those DAWs that we can include with the production course that's coming up. So, okay. I'm going to take one more question, then I'm going to start playing stuff because I've been getting skewered, absolutely skewered on Instagram for just talking nonstop, apparently, and never actually playing anything. I've been loving reading the comments, especially the shitty ones. It's so funny. It's so funny. It's like, what? You didn't give me everything I wanted in this 30-second video? You suck. Oops. Anyways, I'll take one more question, and then we'll just start jumping in this. I know your KNS aux is for point. When EQing the KNS aux, what are you trying to accomplish? More point and less of everything else? Don't worry about the EQ for now. We'll talk about the EQ. It's more for compression, and it's more for enhancing the transient. And I think this is where not a picture is worth 1,000 words. I think an audio example will be you'll be like, oh, I gotcha. And actually, that was the thing that a lot of people messaged me about wanting to hear when I was talking about this in the short that I put out a couple days ago. Everybody's like, okay, just show us what the KNS sounds like. You're making the noises with your mouth, but just play some audio, goddammit. So, all right, here we go. Let's go. Okay. I'm going to play for you guys. Here's what I'm going to do. And I have a control surface here. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to pull down all of my drums. Okay. I'm going to pull down all of my drums. I'm going to mute my KNS. Keep that muted for now. Okay. And you know what? I'll bring this down. So I'm just going to play these drums and do a quick balance. Okay. Give me a thumbs up if everybody can hear that okay. I want to make sure that audio is getting you guys. All right. I'm going to assume that it is. You guys will stop me if it's not, right? Okay. I feel like... I think we're probably all right. Okay, cool. I'm just going to crank the level a little bit here for you guys. Okay. Okay. thank you, guys. Thank you. Okay, so this is a song called Summertime. Band's called Breaker Box. I think I used this in another live stream. Really cool song, just straight ahead rocks, 4 on the floor, big guitars, big bass, great vocals, all the fun stuff that I love using for these things, because I want to have the big bombastic sound for you guys to kind of hear, because that's, getting just nice, clean little balances. That's not that fun. I want to make it over the top. Okay, here we go. Okay. I'm going to show you what's going on with our parallel bus here. Okay. So as you can hear, everything sounds pretty balanced. Do have a pretty good live room. This was actually recorded at Tommy Lee's old studio called the Atrium, and loved the room in that place. And so we've got a room mic here that is providing a lot of that kind of length on the drums, and I'll just kind of give you guys an exaggerated listen of that. So obviously, you can use rooms to help fill in and kind of make drums sound longer or make them sound bigger and all that stuff. But you're also getting the sound of the room, which isn't necessarily always what you want. Sometimes you want just the sound of the whole kit to just sound like it's kind of pumping and maybe exploding a little bit more. So what I like to do is I'm going to pull up a parallel bus here. And really quickly, just to show everybody how, what? I'm just trying to think. Should I just set this up? Because it is already set up. You know what? We'll do this on one of the other, when we do vocals, maybe I'll show you kind of how I'd set it up. But basically, this is already routed. All my kicks, snare, tom, cymbals, and room subgroups all have a send that's sending to this fader here. Okay. I've got a plug-in on it, but I'm going to bypass that plug-in. And I'm going to show you what happens when you just mix in a parallel with nothing else on it. Sounds better, right? It's just because it's louder. Okay, so let's A/B this on and off. Obviously sounds better with it on. It's because it's louder. I'm trying to prove a point here that we're going to get to when we start comparing some apples to apples, because I think a lot of people just do parallel compression and they're like, oh, parallel compression sounds so much better. And it's like, well, how do you really compare it? Like, truly compare it when it's hard to do an A/B because the levels are always different. The minute you start mixing in something else, all of a sudden the levels changes. But we'll get to that in a little bit. So now I'm going to mute the drums on kind of the dry drum bus, and I'm going to only listen to the parallel return here. Okay. So we're only listening to the parallel return right now. And now I'm going to unbypass this compressor. Let me put it up here so you guys can still see the fader. Okay, so this is no compression. You can hear the kick drum going. That's what I want. Now, hearing that is actually a really great example of why I don't just put this compressor on my drum bus as an insert and just roll with that. Because I don't want it to only be woo, woo, woo. I want to have control over that. So, hang on, I lost my earbud here. I got to plug this back in. I wonder how often that happens live. People's earbuds or in-ears come unplugged. All right. Okay, so I'm going to exaggerate this even more. I'm going to go even faster attack and really shave off that transient. Let's see what we're dealing with now. Okay, again, I'm bypassing this plugin. Okay, hear how bombastic that sounds? I love it. The problem is I don't want only that. I want to have very, very careful control over how much of that gets mixed in with the drums. So now what we're going to do is this. I'm going to unmute my drum bus. I'm going to turn this drum fader down, this parallel fader. I'm going to turn it down, and then I'm going to start feathering it in, and you guys can hear how the sound starts to change. Okay, so now I'm going to do one other thing because now I'm really hearing too much of the room. And this is going back to what I said when I was talking about why I have these on sends. I don't want the room going into the bus, or sorry, the parallel. I don't want the room going into the parallel. So I'm going to mute that room, and I'm actually going to turn it off. I'm going to make it inactive because when it's inactive, I know I'm not using it. If I see it bypassed, my brain thinks that there might be automation turning it on and off. So I'm just making it inactive. And I can do that by, I can't remember what the quick key is, Control, Command, Click, I think. So now let's listen to the drum parallel without the room in it. Okay, now what I want you to do is listen. Listen to the length or the perceived length. Listen to the space between the hits. So if you've got a 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, listen to the sound in between the 1, 2, and 3 and 4, and just listen how much more full the sound is, but really only between the hits. The hits actually stay pretty constant. What the actual transients that are on the beat, those stay relatively the same level, but the space that's filling underneath it or in between it gets substantially more full. So listen to this. Now, with this setting on the compressor, I am actually hearing the transient pushing a little bit as well. But I mean, most compressors, you're still getting a little bit of transient kind of smack off the top. But again, it's one of those things that I like. And that's one of the reasons why for so long I didn't have that KNS thing, because you're still getting a little bit of the transient. But where you're really getting the benefit is it's filling out the spaces between the hits, which I really like. That's an aesthetic that I like. Again, it's funny to me when I talk to people or when I see people online or I have, coaching clients or students that I mentor online, and they'll talk about all their parallel stuff and their, the glue with this and all the various words you hear when people talk about compression. And then they'll complain that like things are not defined enough, or there's not enough separation, or it's kind of washy, or it's kind of whatever. Their aesthetic is not the same as somebody like me who wants the drums to be. They want. If that's what you want, you probably shouldn't be using parallel compression the way that I'm using parallel compression. You probably shouldn't be using mix bus compression for glue if you like your mix to have separation. So this just goes back to the why. Why am I using compression? Why am I using parallel compression? Why are you using parallel compression? And if you don't know, then this is a good way to work through that process and figure it out. Now, while we're talking about this, let's talk about, like I said, if you don't want the big kind of bombastic washy thing, let's have a peek at the opposite when I go to the KNS. So let me mute. I'm going to mute the drum bus, and I'm going to only be listening to the KNS, and I'm going to bypass the plugin I have on it right now. Okay. Okay, so that's just the kick and the snare going to my KNS bus. That's what we're listening to right now, nothing else. The snare sounds like, right? To me, that sound is, it sounds like smack to me. So instead of just being that kind of dry, kind of balanced. So this is almost doing the opposite of what that previous parallel compression was doing. This is actually pulling down the space between the transients. So it's letting the transient hit, and then it's sucking it down. And it's letting the transient hit, and then it's sucking it down. And it's really giving it that, like, it's almost like you're really hitting the drum hard. And that's kind of why this works so well, is it kind of just makes it sound like the drummer's hitting the drums harder. And in rock music, that's sometimes what you want, especially when you have a really dense mix and you're trying to get everything to sit in place and really kind of like do its thing. Sometimes you need that. And again, why don't I just put this on the drum bus? Well, because then I don't have the control over it. The other thing is, if I wanted, having this broken out like this and having this separate, if I wanted to EQ, because when this compression scheme does its thing, you kind of lose some frequencies. It kind of like it's not as big anymore. It's not as like, it just kind of like clamps down on it a little bit. I mean, this compressor is great for this, and it already has a little bit of that kind of clamping down effect, both on transients and dynamics, but also in frequencies a little bit. So the other thing you can do with this now, like the low end doesn't seem as big anymore because it's more of a tick than a boom. So now what we can do is we can go and add some additional low end just to this. And this is the New York thing we were talking about. I think they used to use Pultex, but I'll use the Sontec because with the plugin, which sounds awesome, I can have as many as I want. Okay, I'm just going to trim back our output a little bit here for A being. Okay, so now I'm going to put this back on. When I say this, I'm going to turn on the drum bus, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to start feathering in the KNS channel. Sorry, my control surface fader is dirty. and it's not sensing where it should be. All right, try this again. It's off. Probably added a little too much bottom end because I really like the bottom end of this. So let's back that off just a little bit so we're hearing just more of the compression than we are the EQ. So that compression scheme's giving a little bit more of like the punch and the transient and the hit than the other one. And I think that's probably a little bit more like traditionally when people are talking about it, talking about parallel compression, especially on drums that most people are looking for. I like to be able to have it broken out to where I have control over this. So now I'm just going to show you how I would do this in a real mix scenario. I would have my drums balanced. Get my excitement, my pump from the parallel. And then I would sneak in. Now we've got all three. Now, if I mute my drum bus and only listen to the two parallel lines going at the same time, this is what it sounds like. Okay, now here's where things get interesting. How do I compare this to what it would sound like with maybe just a compressor? Maybe I just needed a compressor on my drum bus. How do I objectively compare this? Because right now, there's not really an easy way to do it because I'm going to be dealing with so many different level variances. And so here's what we're going to do. We're going to do a test that I haven't done in a long time, but I did when I was kind of getting the hang of this thing we call mixing. If I ever got a hang of it, I don't know if I still don't have a hang of it. I'm going to duplicate my drum bus. Actually, you know what? I'm not going to duplicate my drum bus. I'm going to make a new stereo return, so an auxiliary input. And I'm just going to name this in all caps, drums with insert. Okay. And I'm going to set that input to the same input that my drum bus is getting. So it's going to get all the same stuff. I'm going to send it out the same output so that way everything's the same. And now, if I mute this, okay, perfect. This is great. So now this is muted because I've got my VCAs soloed here. But right now, actually, you know what? I'm going to unsolo this and I'll just mute all these guys. Okay, great. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a compressor on this kind of duplicate insert and just use this to level match so we can really compare. Okay, so I'm going to collapse this down. And so what we're trying to compare here, just so everybody's clear, is we're going to try to compare the mix that we're going to hear of all three, my dry, my parallel, and my KNS bus. And we're going to compare that to a level matched dry, and then we're going to put a compressor on it and just kind of see what we like better. So if I do this, you should be able to hear. Okay, let's try this here. So I'm going to play it. That's loud. Obviously, that's louder. When all three of those parallel lines are going, it's louder than just the one. So let's just try to level match that a little bit, see if we can get close. Okay. That's pretty close. So I had to turn up basically the drums with insert that we're going to put an insert on here. I had to turn that up about 4 dB to kind of match the level of everything else combined. Now, just for funsies, let's take this API compressor, and I'm not going to use the same setting, but let's set up this API compressor to kind of give me a tone and a pump that I like that's not completely obliterating everything. Kind of like a balanced, I just want to hype this up, okay? This is not only is it a great example of just a way how hard it is to really quickly A/B, but it's also a great example of how difficult it is to do what is very simple with 3 faders. Now I'm trying to do with a compressor, and I'm trying to change. I'm like, I get the attack to where I like it, and then the pump in between the hits isn't doing what I want. And then I change the release, and now I've got to change the threshold, and I just keep chasing my tail. And so it's a good example of, and it's a good reminder to me why I do it the way that I do it. Just makes things so much more simple. And the other thing that I don't know if any of you guys noticed when I was on the edit page, but I like to automate some of these parallel lines independent of what the actual drums are doing. So, for instance, in this scenario, I've got the KNS bus is actually down a little bit in the verse, and then in the chorus it kicks up a couple dB. And so if I was again trying to do that all on one channel with an insert, number one, I don't think most people would even do it. But you'd have to come in and start automating parameters, and then hoping that everything else doesn't change and all this. It actually, by keeping it simpler without the parallel lines, you're actually making it more complicated if you want to try to get that same sound. So I'm going to take a quick look in the chat here. Let's jump over to the chat. Let me scroll up here. Do I ever sneak the bass into the KNS? You know what? I don't, for a couple different reasons. Number one, if I do need a parallel line on the bass, I have one. I know the thing with the kick and the snare parallel that putting the bass in is it all kind of pumps together a little bit. I've tried it. It just doesn't work for me. I think my brain is just too compartmentalized when that's kind of in there. And just, to me, it just makes things more complicated to kind of set everything the way that I want. And then if I want more kick and snare and I turn up the KNS bus, now all of a sudden I lose bass, and then I got to go to my bass, and I got to automate the bass to get it to be back to where it was. So for me, that just doesn't work. But I know like that's something that Randy Staub did a lot of. I've heard of a few guys doing that. So it's something to try. This is all just stuff to try. What works for me might not work for you. And what I am just so stuck in my ways with some of this stuff. And sometimes I convince myself that things don't work just because I don't want them to work. You know, it's like this subconscious thing of like, no, that doesn't work. Because I don't want it to get complicated, or I don't want to start crossing streams of bass into drum compressors and all that stuff. It just doesn't work for me. So, but that doesn't mean you guys can't try it. So, sometimes, gotcha. Okay, somebody answered that question for me. Awesome. David, yeah, it sounds more live and full. Yeah, and I'm assuming that was when I was turning up all the compression, the parallel compressions. So, name an album from your youth that you still love listening to that isn't super compressed. One of the reasons I still love a Doors album is how they breathe. I mean, compared to these days, like just about anything that I listened to when I was, 80s, 90s stuff is just, not anywhere near as compressed as a lot of the stuff today. So, I mean, the albums that I loved that I've talked about a million times before, the albums that kind of inspired me to even find out what a record producer and an engineer did, just kind of off the top of my head. Metallica Black Album, obviously, Motley Crue, Dr. Feelgood, a couple of the other Bob Rock, Randy Staub. There was a Bon Jovi album called Keep the Faith that sounded really great. A lot of the Mutt Lange stuff, Bruce Fairbairn's records. There was an album by a band called Jackal. There was an album, it was called Push Comes to Shove. And that, like, I remember when I first got my, first good pair of headphones, like over the ear. I mean, they weren't that good, but like better than just like the little shitty earbuds you get on a plane. I remember when I was like really into that. I had bought the cassette tape of that Jackal album, and I was really into that at the time. And I was like, when I put those earphones on, I'm like, holy crap, I can hear like the snare reverb now, and I can hear all this stuff. And yeah, so, most of those records are not nearly as compressed as what we're doing, is even with like how I'm mixing today, like just to stay competitive. And even like the sound, I've evolved my tastes as well. And, some of the stuff that I like is just a lot more compressed. So, could you do this in patchwork and use the wet mix, use the wet mix knobs? Absolutely. You absolutely can. And that's actually something we're going to talk about a little bit. I was actually just going to pull open, a compressor that had a mix knob on it, so that we could actually see. So for instance, like look here, the API has a mix knob. So when we go to that drum bus with the insert, instead of all three, we can, let me go back to the verse here and loop this. We can, you can press it a little bit harder. Yeah, it's interesting. Sorry, I forgot to switch the screen back. I'm out of practice, guys. Thanks for giving me the heads up in the chat. So basically what I was doing is I was using the mix knob. We've got the API 2500 here The plug-in version has the mix knob. I think maybe even the newest hardware version does as well. They're starting to put mix knobs on hardware, which is awesome, because unless you're using a console, sometimes doing this, if you've got a hardware insert and you want to set this up, if you go outside of your rig and then back in and try to do a parallel line, you're going to have probably some phase issues. And I think a lot of people try that and they're like, oh, parallel compressing sucks because it gets all phasey. It shouldn't. If you're in the analog world, it doesn't. If you're going in and out of a computer, yes, it absolutely does. So sometimes you have to print it and then shift it. So the fact that they're starting to put these mix knobs on hardware just goes to show you how powerful parallel compression is, because this in essence is giving you a kind of a parallel option, right? Being able to mix back and forth between the two. Again, pros and cons of mix knob versus having things broken out. In my opinion, if I want to send a little bit less kick drum to this compressor, let's say the kick drum is just hitting this too hard, there's no way for me to do that if I have this on the insert and I've got the mix knob at 40%. There's no way for me to do that without then affecting everything else. If I want to add some bottom end to just the compression scheme and not the whole thing, because it's a little bit of a different thing. Or if I wanted to add some EQ before going into the compressor to make the compressor pump a certain way, there's no way to do that with just this mix knob. And so pros and cons. With certain scenarios, just use the mix knob. If it's kind of like, yeah, I just want to feather in a little bit of extra compression, great, awesome. If you're finding when you're practicing mixing or you're experimenting with different ways of doing things, if you're finding that you're wanting to treat the dry and the compressed separate, set up a parallel line, set up another return and have a parallel option. And again, if you have that set up ready to go, you might not always use it, but when you want to use it, it's there ready to rock. So, would you ever route toms to the KNS bus for a song that has significant tom groove sections? Well, believe it or not, regardless of the sections of the songs, sometimes I will put the toms in there if I need the toms to have more of that smacky thing. So even if they're not like, there's not like a tom groove, even if it's just fills like a regular, tom fill, whatever, if I want them to have that smacky character to them, and I don't want to start changing stuff on the tom bus. Sorry, let me go back to my main screen here. If I don't want to start changing stuff on my tom bus here, I like the balance. I just want to feather in a little bit of that smacky thing. I'll just copy over the KNS bus off of one of my kicks and snares, and then I'll just adjust the levels to get it to where it needs to be. So yeah, I do that a lot, and it can sound really good. Let me give you an example here. Let's find some toms. Actually, this song does have a tom section, so perfect. Let's just do this a little bit here. Put these off to the side just a hair. Okay. So this is actually a really great example. Like, I would love some more transient on those toms. And so we can do a couple different things. You could go and just put a transient designer on all the toms. You could put a compressor on the tom bus and just make it kind of hit, kind of smack a little bit harder. Like, I'll just drag over this. I've got an arouser, which is the distressor plugin. It's not really giving me what I want specifically. So if I put that onto the KNS bus now, Yeah, see, even this isn't really working the way I want. So it doesn't always, it's not always the right answer. So this would be a scenario where I'd probably go to the individual tracks and just put a transient designer and get them to smack. Or I'd turn on my parallel tom bus here, right? And then I got to just go turn on my sends. I leave the sends off if I'm not using them because they do take up some processing power. Just let me turn. I'm going to take out the kick and snare bus for the toms. Let's turn this stuff back on. So now I've got this extra tom parallel that I could probably just copy over this. Let's see what we're getting. We're going to have to go a little harder on this. So basically, it's not giving me the exact effect that I want. Again, it's helping, but this is one of those scenarios where the parallel compression is not the answer. For me, I would go to the tracks and I would just give it the smacky on each individual hit. So great question, and it was actually a good little exercise to kind of run through there to see how whether or not parallel compression can solve all your problems or not. Sometimes it can't. I mean, it didn't sound bad, just really wasn't what I was going after. So I'll make that inactive and turn it off. Then I'll turn off the sends here. I've got a couple more questions in the chat, which I love. Thank you guys for participating in the chat. I love this. Somebody's tuning in from Ireland, can't sleep. Might as well get educated. No kidding. I do the same thing. When I can't sleep, I just end up watching YouTube videos either on, how to fix, washers and dryers and build boxes and, get your grass all green. The home improvement videos suck me in like crazy. Finding my mom's Slippery When Wet album was mind-blowing. Oh, I love that. I found my dad's Slippery When Wet album when I was probably about the same. So, yeah, I agree with you. It's interesting. When I first started paying attention to how albums sounded, well, maybe I didn't even start paying attention to it. I started kind of just being aware that like certain albums sounded similar, even though they were by different artists. And actually I remember that was kind of one, I think it was Slippery When Wet. And I remember the first time I heard, might have been The Cult, Sonic Temple maybe. And I'm just like, oh, this kind of has a little bit of like a Bon Jovi thing to it. Like I didn't really put the pieces together at that particular moment, but I was kind of aware of it. And then there was like a run of Bob Rock, Randy Staub albums that I was like looking at the back. I would, read the album covers and stuff like that. And I kept on seeing the same names. And that was like, aha, these guys make these records. That was kind of a thing for me. So yeah, Slippery When Wet. I remember Slippery When Wet. And I think it was The Cult. I kind of was like, well, these kind of have a similar vibe. But yeah, I mean, Slippery When Wet's great sounding record. To this day, that record still sounds good. Really good. Everybody calling me out for not switching over. Thank you very much. He was comping just the snare, kick, and toms to a new stereo track and then detuned them 4 or 5 half steps and then blended them back in. Yeah, that's that was a trick kind of back in the day, pre-samples. That was a way to kind of give almost like that artificial. Now, I mean, you could absolutely still do that. I just do it with samples. If I need kind of a instead of taking the snare and tuning it down, I'll just find a snare sample that goes so, but yeah, that was a cool trick. Back in the day, they didn't like having samples, let alone one sample or 5 that, we use these days. It wasn't that easy. Like, it wasn't that easy to just turn on a thing and then all of a sudden a kick drum would be triggering. They had to figure out ways to do it, and then you had to put it in time, and there was all these tricks that they would do it with hardware units and samplers and stuff like that. So sometimes the sample wasn't the way to do it. It was to do two tricks like that where you would detune and then mix back in and stuff like that. A lot of people were using like the Eventides and the AMSs and stuff like that. And it definitely has a cool sound. I'll just find a sample that has that sound. But yeah, it's kind of a cool trick. That's a throwback trick for sure. Parallel processing, or maybe sometimes different samples for the drums. Yep. Both, all of the above. Yeah. Didn't Bob Rock mix Slippery when I believe he did. Yeah. And it engineered it with Bruce Fairburn. Bruce Fairburn produced that record. So I think they did the next one. Man, there was like 3 Bon Jovi albums in a row that all just like at the time were like the pinnacle of sonics. Slippery When Wet, New Jersey sounded ridiculous. I remember hearing that for the first time, and that sounded ridiculous. And then the one after that, Keep the Faith, that was the one that I was telling you. That was kind of one right when I was being like, this Motley Crue, Bon Jovi, Metallica thing is weird because there's hints of similar sonics. And that was kind of when I started figuring that stuff out. So yeah, very cool. Yes, I believe George Marino did the mastering. Rest in peace. Yeah. He did all, like, he mastered most of my favorite records back then. He was kind of doing all that stuff. So yeah. Okay, back to it. Okay. I'm going to so that's kind of drums. So it's interesting, drums with transients, right? It's kind of like, okay, but what about when you're dealing with something that's not transient? Let's say heavy guitars. What would you use parallel compression for with heavy guitars? Sometimes it's not just compression. And this is where things can get a little bit interesting when you start thinking about, well, what if you used parallel saturation? What if you used parallel distortions? That type of thing. And a lot of saturation plugins now have mix knobs. A lot of distortion plugins also have mix knobs. But again, the reason why I do parallel returns is just for the control and also for the just for the ease of grabbing 2 faders and quickly being able to balance. And if I want to throw a plug-in on something before or after whatever that parallel processing is, it's a little easier to do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop open the rhythm guitars. And if I skipped over anything on the drums that you guys kind of want to hear or compare or whatever, let me know. I think I made my point. Whatever my point was. All right. I'm going to turn on, again, let's hear the guitars. Oh, I got to turn on my guitar. Okay. All right, so just straight up heavy guitars. Okay. I'm going to turn on the parallel bus and turn on all the sends here. So that way this parallel bus is now getting all the sends. And let's see what else we might want from these guitars. So I'm going to turn on, let's turn on the bass, the drums, and the guitars so we can hear a little context. Okay, so if I was mixing this song, just based off of what I'm hearing, my initial gut is I want a little bit more just edge on those guitars. They're a little, I don't want to say soft, but they're a little dark, and I don't think EQ is the thing. I think it's actually just maybe adding a little bit of distortion or a little bit of saturation. So we're going to set that up and see how this can help our cause. Here we go. So I'm just going to go for a plugin that has, I know for a fact, has a mix knob on it. The reason I'm going to do that is because of that the thing I was talking about of like, well, what if I want to affect the dry signal and the wet signal a little differently, EQ wise? I think in this scenario, I'm probably going to want to do that. And so having the wet dry knob might not necessarily be the best ticket to do that. So I'm going to set this to 100% wet. I'm going to mute the dry bus and just hear what this is doing on our parallel bus just for now. And I'm trying to find this where you guys can still see the mutes and all that stuff. Okay. The other nice thing about having this on two faders, even if you're using a plugin that has a wet dry knob, there isn't really a great, I don't want to say like standard, but I find some plugins, the way that they adjust the kind of the auto gain on the wet dry, because some plugins try to keep it like keep the relative level the same regardless of where the wet dry knob is, which I appreciate. Because a lot of the time when you're doing that, you don't want the level to be jumping all over the place. But I feel like there's a scale that isn't quite standard. Some plugins do it great and other plugins don't. And so just having it on two faders is just a very easy way to just be like, okay, well, I can play with this, as opposed to having to, finagle finding the right thing, and then maybe the level drops a little bit and you got to bump that level up and go back and forth. So see what we got here, folks. I want even more hair on that because it's just sounding a little too big. Yeah, let's go hard, and then it'll make it a little more obvious here. Here's another example of some tricky stuff you could do. So I'm liking that. That's giving me, like, you're not hearing how crackly that is in the mix, but there's this excitement. This is kind of like almost tension that it's like the guitars are on the brink of exploding a little bit because we're just sneaking that in there. Obviously, it was too loud. It would just sound like they were all crapping out. But I like what that's doing. Again, having your parallel lines and being able to just have control and being able to separate some stuff out. I was actually just thinking about trying something where on my effects send 4, which is returned down here. Oh, I can't. Give me my main screen so you guys can see it. This fader down here is always my pitch spread, whatever that happens to be. And this changes a little bit from time to time, but it's basically some sort of pitch delay widener kind of thing. And so I'm going to try sending just that fuzzy thing to that pitch spread. Okay, that's subtle, but I don't know if you guys can hear it. I hope you can. There's a cool thing going on. I saw somebody in the chat just mention the wow thing. It's interesting. That almost gives me a little bit of the stereo spread, and I actually have a wow thing return set up over here. I just don't have it on right now. I don't use it all the time. But I use that as an auxiliary send. So if you look down here, there's my effects. Wow. So I use that. I use my Dolby A simulation with Satin, and then I use the BX subsynth, which I call DBX 120 because I used to have a 120 on a hardware insert. Yeah, so those I always bring into my session, but I don't always use them, which is why they're usually hidden and inactive unless I want to use them, and then I'll turn them on. But I want to hear this again. This is sounding cool. I think I might have just found a new trick. Okay, there we go. Now you can really hear it. Turn all the drums and everything off. You can really hear what's going on now. Man, that sounds horrendous in solo. That's why we don't mix in solo, guys. Let me turn the drums and the bass back on. I think I might be starting my mix templates with my rhythm guitar parallel on from now on. That's great. I love that. So basically what you're hearing is I added all that fuzzy, crappy stuff up top, rolled off some of the low end within Decapitator, and then I sent almost, faders at full. So that's basically like a 50-50 between the dry and the wet. Let me go pre-fader on this and see what happens. No, I like it better the other way. It's a little that's turning into a little too much Bon Jovi. Not in a good way. I'm kidding. I love John Bon Jovi, and I love the whole thing. You guys know that. I was just talking about it. No, it sounds a little like 80s pitch spread, too much for me. So I'm going to go back post fader and then on the micro pitch, and then blend that in. That's cool. That's cool. I think that's going to be a new trick I use. It's not trick, technique. I hate that. I say the word trick a lot. It's not a trick. There's nothing magical about it. It just is what it is. All right, let me hit the chat for a second here. Some stuff coming in. Low end on the bass is so mean. Yes, you know what? I'm gonna open up the bass to look at parallel as well, because there's something here that is technically parallel. Yeah, with some plugins, the dry wet is not implemented correctly. Yeah, agreed. If we are with guitars, aux with Randy's Wow thing to make it wider and deeper. Yeah. You know, it's weird with the deeper thing. I usually don't with guitars these days, and I know why Randy was doing it. Like back, 90s, 80s, like the guitars didn't have a ton of low end. Now, now most of the guitars I get have too much low end. And so when I am using the Wow thing, a lot of the time I'm like, when I'm using the plugin, like I won't be using much of the low thing that it does. It's mainly kind of the Uber stereo thing that I love. Do you always slip a bit of parallel distortion to guitars? No, very rarely, actually. It's usually just when I need like a little bit of that kind of grit on top. I try to, the way that I typically produce is like I try to get that. If I know I'm going to need it, I'll add a different layer of guitars on there with a little bit more of a gritty sound. But I typically don't start with that by any means. This is definitely an as needed approach. But hearing that with the micro pitch send, I think I might be doing that a little bit more often. Jesse, saw the 8 VCA instrument Vox groups. What are the last 2, 9, and 10 used for? Excuse me. You're talking about these here, I'm assuming? Okay, so I've got VCA drums, VCA percussion, VCA bass, VCA guitars, A, B, C, keys, lead vocal, background vocal. I've got one for all my effects. And then I've also got one for all of my my food group returns. So you can see this is moving all of them together, including parallels. So it's all my dry kind of subgroups and my parallels. So that way, if I need to trim going into my master bus, that's one way I can do it. So yeah. I think that's what you were asking. Yes, I learned a new trick. You guys learn a new trick too. You get a trick, and you get a trick, and you get a trick. We all get tricks. How do I usually decide to use pre-fader or not? Okay, so great question. I do get this question quite a bit, especially with parallels, because I send most of my parallel stuff is being sent from send. I start my starting place is post fader, so I want automation moves to potentially go with it. And the other thing is, I'm not doing a lot of automating, and I'm not doing a lot of like heavy dynamics on these folder routing folders. I'm usually doing them on the feeder tracks. So when that's one of the reasons why I send them from here as opposed. Sorry, I'm not on my screen. Sorry, guys. Here we go. Blah, 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 blah. So I send my parallel sends from the actual like multi tracks, from the actual like guitar tracks or drum tracks or whatever, instead of like my food group subgroup folder here where everything's routed into. And the reason why I do that is, number one, so I can control the relative balance going into them. It might not always want it to be the same. But also what it allows me to do is it basically gives me an exact copy of what's going on. So if I change the balance, then it's going to stay like that in the, it's going to stay like that on the parallel line. The problem you run into, and this is kind of the trade-off, everybody, you got to find what works for you. The trade-off is if you're doing a ton of heavy lifting dynamically, like with a compressor on your parallel line, and then you're doing a bunch of automation on your multi-tracks that are feeding it, and it's feeding it post-fader, you're going to be really messing with what that compressor is seeing. And so you have to kind of make that decision based off of the what else is going on. I start in post-fader, but if vocals is actually a good example. We'll jump to vocals next. Vocals is a good example of where you might want to do pre-fader. And so that way, if you're automating the multi-track that's feeding, or the vocal track that's then feeding your parallel bus, that's not determining what the compressor is seeing. The compressor is seeing the same thing the whole time, regardless of what kind of automation's going on. Sometimes the automation's a good thing. Sometimes it smooths it out and makes the compressor act a certain way. So that's why they put a button on this thing that just lets you turn it on and off. Boom, 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 boom. It's very easy to turn on and off. It's very easy to kind of play around with that and see what works best. You got to figure out what works best. And the only way to do that is to do a mix, spend a couple hours and practice doing parallel compression on everything with pre-fader and then with post-fader, and see what you like better. And see, maybe it works best on vocals, but pre-fader doesn't work on drums for you. Like, everybody's got a little bit of a different thing. So, I was going to open the bass. Let me answer one more question in the chat, and then I'll go open the bass, because that's another parallel example of, it's not just parallel compression. Parallel whatever you want it to be. Thank you, Dan. I appreciate that. He says it's one of the best mixed breakdown live streams ever. I appreciate that, because sometimes, you know what? When I start getting into this like geeky stuff and really getting technical and bouncing around with pre-fader, post-fader stuff, sometimes I'm wondering if anybody cares. So I appreciate that. Thank you. CLA said mixing in the box with plugins post-fader makes him put master fader at 0 and then use the other aux that feeds the master to keep the same level for master bus all the time. I mean, I usually keep my master at 0 anyways. Plugins post fader. With the plugins post fader. I'm not sure. I'd have to dig into that a little bit further. Not sure. Okay, let's go back here. All right, so bass. Talking about parallel. We do need to leave that on. Okay, I'm going to show you guys something. I hope you guys can see this. If you can see the name of this audio file, that's the exact same file on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 tracks. And then these are all routed to my bass routing folder right here. This is the definition of parallel. You can see them running in parallel, perfectly straight lines that are exactly the same, of the exact same audio file. And so this is another example of parallel processing where each line is a different sound. It's not about compression. It's just about tonality. So we've got our bass DI. We've got an amp. And when I say amp, it's basically a sim of the dark glass pedal, which I use all the time in the real world while tracking bass. It's actually one of my favorite setups is I'll do a dry DI and a dark glass, like really like full tilt DI, or sorry, full tilt dark glass, and then mix them print them separate and then mix them together on a stereo track. So then we got like a gnarly kind of mid-rangey amp sim. Then we've got my favorite tried and true Sans amp plugin. Then for you guys listening on speakers or on big studio speakers or headphones, you'll be able to hear the Pro Sub doing the thing, adding a nice octave below. And then when you mix them all together, get something along the lines of that. So again, those are all technically parallel processing. So even something like as simple as, putting a 57 and a 421 on the same, cabinet and putting them on separate channels, but the same take at the same like I wouldn't really consider that parallel processing, but it kind of is a way. In a way, it's kind of a similar thing. You're using two things from the same source, two sounds from the same source to mix together after the fact. And so this is actually a really great example of it that you probably wouldn't consider parallel, but that's exactly what that is. I've got the same thing duplicated. And the reason why I don't do it with sends is because sometimes people send me tracks where there's already an amp, or there's already a distortion, or there's already a Sans amp. And that way, the fact that I've got them on tracks instead of auxiliaries, if somebody does send me one with an amp or it's something I've tracked and I've already got the dark glass, well, then I turn this off and I drop the audio file on this track. So that's just a more of a workflow thing. Because I've had people ask me that. They're like, why don't you use a send for that? So somebody asked a question in the chat. This is a good one. Do you always have a sub bass in your mixes usually? It's always in there, ready to go if I need it. And I'm going to show you guys, this is a nice trick. It is a trick. I know I said I don't like tricks, but this is a trick. Pro Sub has a MIDI node. And so you can trigger Pro Sub with a MIDI track. So that way it doesn't give you all that warbly when it's trying to detect the note. And so what I like to do as part of my mix setup is I like to get the, sorry guys. Sorry. Keep doing it. Pro Sub has a MIDI node right up here. You can see it, MIDI node. And so what it lets you do, and you can see there's a little MIDI input there, is it lets you send a MIDI note to it that it will then use as like a detector. And so one of the problems that I used to have a lot when I had my DBX 120 is when you would solo it, sometimes you could hear it kind of switching between notes, like it wouldn't know what note to synthesize. And so the Pro Sub has really helped me with that. I mentioned earlier that I really like this plugin. Let me see if I can pop it up here. And I'm going to selfishly put this out in the universe. Pro Sub works great. I'm fine with Pro Sub. But I would love it, and if anybody knows any of the guys from Plugin Alliance, if they would kindly improve upon this plugin by letting it detect a MIDI track as its pitch reference, that would be awesome. Because this has some stuff that the Pro Sub doesn't have, that sonically that I really like. But if it's picking up the note incorrectly, if it's synthesizing the wrong thing, it can muddy up your mix real fast. So be careful of that. So I have that ready to go in my mixes all the time. And when I'm getting my bass sound, again, I'll just do this again. Let me hit play here. I just went into mixing mode there for a second. I'm like, I'm mixing a song. Sorry, guys. I hope you guys could hear. I was just trying to sneaking in the, I'm sneaking in that sub and just kind of seeing where it sat. In this song, because of where the kick drum's sitting, getting that sub underneath the kick drum and then having all that like kind of gritty, mid-rangey bass on top of the kick drum kind of envelops the kick drum in a really cool way. And so in this song, I would absolutely use that sub. I don't use it in every song, but it's in every song. It's always set up. So, and again, overarching theme of all this parallel stuff is have it set up ready to go so you can quickly audition it and decide if you need it, or if you're having trouble doing whatever you're trying to do on an insert, and you're just like, man, I like it way it is. I just need a little bit more of this or whatever. Leave everything intact and just kind of sneak that parallel in. That thing can make an awesome difference. But if you have to take the time and stop and set it up and do all your routing and this and that and the other thing, most of the time people just won't, like, you just won't do it. Like, you'll subconsciously convince yourself to do something else as opposed to just, because it's not easy. So make it easy. Set it up in your system, and then in your template, and then you can always decide if you want to use it or not. Somebody earlier asked about, what did they say? Patchwork. So Patchwork is an awesome plugin that you can set up all your, like, you can have, I think it's 8 or 12 parallel lines in it. It's awesome for this. It's amazing. And Waves makes one too that I used to use a lot. I still do. Called Studio. It's not called Studio Rack anymore. Studio Verse. Let me see. Studio Rack. Studio Verse. Well, I'm gonna open the Studio Rack one. Oh yeah, and then there's Studio Verse there. I don't know why I'm not logged in. But I'm going to show you a little something. Here's a humble brag. Humble brag. Is there such a thing? Oh, who's that guy? Who's this guy? Doesn't know what he's talking about. Actually, I'm going to show you this on bass. It's a great example to do it on bass. Okay, I'm going to mute all these bass lines that I have going. So it's just the DI. Gah. Somebody asked if that bass DI was processed on the way in. It probably was. I usually do. I'll usually get it sounding the way they want. Definitely sounds like an active pickup. Oh, you actually, you know what that might be? I don't think that's a real bass. When I say it's not a real bass, I think that's a sampled. I think that's like a sampled bass, which so good, so good. All right, so I showed you how I do that with all the faders. You can do that with plugins as well. And so here I'll pull up in my bass Studio Rack. And so I have a bunch of parallel splits in this. So if you click on this, there's 2 different parallel splits. So really quickly. So I play this bass. Now I've got... So within this plugin, it lets you do parallel splits. And so I've got my DI on one. I've got an amp sim on the other. I've got a multi-band split that I can't remember what that's going to. Another one. Oh, yeah, that's right. And then it's done doing like another distortion thing, different distortion on the top end and the bottom end. And then I've got low wear for my sub. So there are plugins that you can do this all in, which I love. It's just, you have to open the plugin, and I've got a control surface. And so sometimes the knobs are like faders and knobs aren't really compatible and stuff like that. So I just like to keep it on the console, or on the faders. What console? Just keep it on tracks and on the faders for things that I know I'm going to be like kind of blending and balancing a lot. But it is super nice. Like with Patchwork, I think I did a video where I was showing people how you can have all your kick drum samples in one track in Patchwork, and then you can just use the knobs to get your blend between like a bunch of different libraries. That's so cool. And then you got one track. The bass, same thing. Like sometimes I will use this because it's preferable just to keep things simple. And now that's my bass sound. But here, I'll show you. That's another amp sound. Like dirty sound. And you got your low. And I've got another parallel split where I got compression and dry. And then I've got the limiter on the end of it, so that way it slots it all into place, and it doesn't really change the level as you start cranking into it. You're just listening for more tone and the attack and the kind of the way that the dynamics pump. So there are tools that you can do a lot of cool parallel chains in here, and then you can save it, and that's like your parallel chain. So I've got one for vocals as well. So go back to the chats. One of the things that somebody asked me about leading up to this, it was actually a question that came in through the newsletter that when I sent it out a couple weeks ago when we first tried to do this. And somebody asked about mix bus parallel processing, to where they send the same signal to like 3 different mix buses and squash them and then kind of blend them back in together. That's something I've experimented with. And for me, again, it's one of those things with the way that I work and the moves that I make and what I want to hear and how I want to hear it, that just didn't work for me. But I know some great mixers that's exactly how they work. And so, again, one of those things, try it out. And so, you know, one of the ways to do that would just be to duplicate. You can't use a master fader. You'd have to feed an auxiliary. So if you were to do this, like you could, and I actually have in my I/O setup, I have, you know what? Let's actually do this. Let's do a little test here. How about it? Okay, let me get a quick balance. Let me put this bass, take this bass rack off. Let me get a quick balance, and we're going to listen to some mix bus stuff here, okay? So let me play this. Bear with me for a second. Okay, and I was talking about being able to kind of mix when you have your parallel lines on separate tracks, you can automate them really quickly. So I'm going to just take these out completely of the verses. Somebody says they heard a Mick Mars riff in there. Well, I think I actually played guitar in this, so that's probably where it came from. So when that verse hits, those wide, fuzzy top end guitars just disappear, which is great. Like we have complete control over these, separate from everything else, which is awesome. So let me just give me 2 minutes. I'm going to do a quick rough balance here, and then we are going to try some mix bus compression stuff. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to set up, because right now I'm going through a bunch of different things. What am I trying to do here? Let me set up 3 auxiliaries. Oh, how about 2? Okay. So I'm just going to set these up. I'm going to make them red. Oh, tracks, thank you. Red. Boom. Okay. In my I.O. setup, I actually have 3 master buses. Got a mix A, B, and C. And so let's just set this up. So we'll do mix A, mix B, and mix C. Actually, you know what? I'm going to have this all come from A, and then we'll just use these as parallel lines. That's what we're going to do. Bear with me. I'm winging it. All right. And then so all of this stuff now has to feed mix bus A. This is going to sound a little weird because I'm not going through my outboard chain. You guys are in this. I'm pulling back the curtain. You guys are going to be like, oh, that doesn't sound good anymore. Okay. All right. So let's just do this. We're going to need a little squishy squashy on this. Almost ready. Okay, so now that we've got our single mix bus here, right? That's what we're listening to. I do have a little bit of compression on it. Now, let's do this. The compression on that is kind of just, it's kind of clamping a little bit is what I would say. It's giving it a little bit of a pump, but it's kind of clamping down on some transients. It's enhancing some transients. Let's try one. Let's just like really blow one up. Okay, I want to go to the chat. Give me a compressor plugin to try to really make something like really like over the top compressed that we're going to mix bus compressor. First person to give me that in the chat is what I will roll with, pending I have it. So I'm taking requests. Who's going to give it to me? Come on. Come on. Who's giving it to me? Devil Lock. Oh, good one. Okay, I got Devil Lock and I got Abbey Road TG. I'll do one of each, okay? Devil Lock. We'll go deluxe. So we have a little bit of control. Oh, Alex Distressor, one of my faves. How's it going, buddy? For anybody who's watching this, definitely go check out Alex's, who just in the chat, Alex Emmerich. Check out his YouTube channel. He's got lots of awesome stuff on it. I think he's got a course that just came out, which I'm sure is also awesome. Go buy it. Go buy it. I'm okay promoting things for other people. I just don't like doing it for myself. What did we say? TG? Okay. All right. So let's just really quickly, let's hear this. Yeah. Smash. Oh, TG mastering compressor. Sorry. Thank you. Okay. Let's try this one. All right. So we got a smashy, squishy, squashy sound with the... That sounds good just like that. Wow. I like this. Okay, let me pull up these faders on my control surface here, and we'll just play around with them to see what's what. Okay, so we got this one. Got that one. Oh, we gotta make this hit harder. This is not really doing anything differently. So why don't we add some EQ to that? Okay, now let's start mixing these together. And then the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make a fourth one where we can have a gain matched clean one. So we'll just go mix dry and we'll take a no compressor at all. Okay, so that's our dry. We're not going to hear that at the same time. We're going to hear these three. Okay, here we go. Okay, I think I'm blowing you guys up. Let me trim all these back. Okay. Now, let's level match. Okay, so you can hear there's definitely a cool excitement, and it's nice to be able to balance, like, especially that devil lock, that mid range on that devil lock. It's really nice to be able to balance that. Like, it's pretty cool. Let me throw. Somebody said the Kramer pie. All right, let's put a Kramer. I'm going to put a Kramer pie on. Let's put a Kramer pie in this dry one and see if we can just put a little bit of compression on it. Not that much. So this is a great example. Wow, this is fun. This is an experiment I haven't done in a while. This is a great example of certain people really insisting that, like, you know, and this, like, for me with drums, right? 30 minutes ago, I'm telling all of you that you got to do parallel compression on drums. It's like, it's just the way to go. There's no other way. There obviously is a ton of other ways, but for me, this whole parallel situation on the master bus for me is, I don't want to say less of a thing, but it, like, I think almost in this scenario, I'm preferring the mix dry. It's not dry anymore, but it's just got a compressor on the insert. I'm almost preferring that to the others. Taster's choice, as they say. Whatever you prefer. For me, I think just my workflow is not super conducive to having parallel compression on the parallel compression on the master, just because I've got some outboard gear, summing stuff, just the whole way. But somebody said with just the TG, it sounded best in my opinion. Oh, interesting. Let's listen to just the TG. It's hard to tell because it's adding, we've got the EQ on it as well. So let's take the EQ off. I mean, it's obviously it's set for the parallel thing, which is like a little bit more blown up, but yeah, it's definitely interesting with the mix bus. Just in this little experiment here, my tendencies when I'm mixing, I could get lost in all the different variables really fast. I could see myself getting a mix to where it sounds pretty damn good and then spending another 4 hours balancing out all the different options of the mix bus here. With the drums and the bass and the guitar stuff, it's way more simpler personally for me. So sorry. Somebody's asking a question here. The analog hiss on the TQ, do you usually turn the TG? Yeah, most of the waves stuff I turn off. The stuff that I use a lot, I don't even know where it is in this one. Where is it? Sure, it's somewhere. Some sort of analog button somewhere. Doesn't matter. Yeah, I usually turn off a lot unless it has some sort of saturation that I'm looking for. I'll usually turn off the analog buttons on a lot of the stuff. Some of the plugins have a cool kind of drive control. But right. Okay. I'm going to go back to the chat and, obviously we've spent, we're almost 2.5 hours in on this. This is great. Man, I've learned a lot. I've, come up with a new parallel guitar trick. Confirmed a few things. It was cool showing you guys kind of how I set things up and kind of talking through it. I recommend every once in a while just going through and doing a little experiment like this just to confirm either what you're doing is working or finding a better way, or maybe even stumbling upon kind of a new thing like we did today. So I definitely recommend doing this, but I'm going to go to the chat. I think I skipped over some things here that we'll open it up for, it can be parallel stuff. It can be asking what I ate for lunch. It can be, I don't know, Bob Rock, Randy Staub trivia, whatever you guys want. Figure we got another 10 minutes, so I'll go to the chat and answer some questions here. So, all right, let's do it. I'm going up in the chat a little bit. What was the name of the Waves? That's the one. That was the Kramer Pi one. Yeah. That Kramer Pi, man, that's still a great plugin. I don't use that enough, and that's definitely just playing around now with it. I got to bring that back up. That's a great that plugin is great on vocals too. I know a ton of people who there was a couple of people I was mixing for 10 years ago. Every vocal had that on it, and it was like their vocals always sounded so good. I just left it on. Why don't I use it? I don't know. I'll probably start. Yeah, it's got a cool aggressive thing going on. Have used a parallel widener master for choruses in the past. Oh, that's cool. That's a cool trick. Yeah. One of the things that I've done a little bit, it's a little weird because your levels can get a little wonky. But sometimes I'll pan in, like I'll have the choruses at 100, and then, all the rest of the song, I'll just kind of pan in a little bit. You usually have to dip the level to get it so it doesn't have a level discrepancy as things start coming in center. But yeah, having that wideness, having that wideness thing kind of kick in the choruses is nice. I try to build that into productions as much as I can as well. So, you are welcome, Dan. Thank you for all the great questions and the participation in the chat. I appreciate you guys all for showing up. Danny, provocative. I like that. Was it provocative? Joe Barisi said the hardware Pi is the fastest compressor ever known to man. Oh, cool. Yeah, it is. It can smack really hard, which is good. Glenn, who will win the Stanley Cup? I don't know. Here's what I think we have to do. I think we have to go and look here. Let's go have a peek. Let's go peek. All right. All right, who do we got? Now we're getting to the important stuff. Okay. Winnipeg. Man, Winnipeg's doing great this year. Winterpeg, as it's known. Oh my God, LA Kings. I don't think I realized they won again last night. The Kings are beating Edmonton. Wow, didn't see that one coming. I'm gonna pick. I'm a Montreal Canadiens fan. I watched last night's game. Unfortunately, they're just overpowered. They barely made the playoffs. They're just overpowered. So that's not gonna work. I'm gonna go Toronto, and I'm gonna say Toronto and Vegas in the final, and Vegas wins. All right. How many people just tuned out that aren't hockey fans? That's all right. Besides Summon Mixer, what other outboard gear is in my chain? I wish I could pull my webcam off and show you guys. Oh, I know what I can show you guys. There's a really cool plugin. Give me a second while I pull it up. Make sure I don't have anything sensitive information here. Okay. All right, good. I can show you guys this. Hang on one second. There's a really cool application called Session Recall. And Session Recall does recall sheets. And you basically can turn the knobs on these things, and then you export a PDF. It's really cool. But basically, this is a representation of one of my outboard mix bus chains. So I go out of my converters. I use the Matrix, the Avid Matrix Studio. I go out of my converters into this Epsilon Limited 4000, which is like a SSL 4000 circuitry summing amp. That's 16 outs. That gets summed and goes into the Crane Song converter. And then I've got a little bit of processing here. This changes. All of this, just so you guys know, as you are all scrambling to write stuff down, all of this stuff changes. This might be different tomorrow, right? So This is not this isn't a set it and forget it. Yeah, I mean, there's starting points, but this stuff changes. So, if you're gonna try to chase settings, don't do it in a vacuum. Like, make sure it works for what you're doing. Okay, so then when I come back into Pro Tools, then I go out a hardware insert. I go out to the back EQ. Back EQ is usually adding a good amount of top end, and it's kind of like a gentle slope. So just kind of, it's almost a bit of a tilt EQ, but then add some more bottom end back in. Because I tend to mix a little dark. I think it's because I don't listen very loud. And then when I turn it up, I'm like, oh, there's tons of bass. There's tons of low end. There's not enough top end. So I've just tried to, I kind of build that into my mixes now. I've got the Dramastic Obsidian, which is kind of like a hi-fi SSL-G comp. And then I've got the Overstare MAS, which is like saturator. The thing I actually really like about this bottom unit is the EQ curves. So I use the shelving EQs and also the high pass. I feel like I just did a video about this. Did I just do a video about this? I don't know. Doesn't matter. And then the other one I use is, oh, hang on. The other one that I use is devices. Hang on. Oh, here, why don't I do new session? There we go. I'll do this guy. So this is my alternative mix bus chain. So same idea, go out to the Epsilon, come back in the Crane song, and then I have a different hardware insert with the mix bus or the bus plus and the fusion. And I can very quickly and easily switch between those two chains. So what I like to try to do is I'll get a mix going with kind of not a lot happening, maybe no hardware insert in. I'll just got to get it balanced out. And then I will I'll turn this one on, I'll set it up. I'll turn the other one on, I'll set it up, and I'll kind of hear back and forth, and then I'll just make a decision which one do I like better, and then I mix into it for the rest of the mix. So hopefully that was some info that you guys would like. Let me quit that. Don't save. All right. Back to the chat. Speaking earlier of 90s productions, what are your thoughts on the King's X album Dogman? I don't know, Brian did that. It's massive. I mean, I was never a huge King's X fan, but as far as like sonically, that's great. Great album. Great album sonically. I mean, it's a great album, period. But was never really my thing. But I did listen to that album because it sounded so great. Brendan O'Brien's awesome. I think when I was kind of growing up and getting into this, I didn't realize how many, not only big albums, but like really cool sounding albums. Not always like the most like kind of big, hi-fi, bombastic, cartoony, but like just albums that sounded really good. I don't think I realized how many of them were his mixes. I don't know why. I feel like I've only kind of like woken up to that over the last like 5 years. Yeah, he does amazing work. So with this Pro Sub or DBX 120 for sub, you don't need to record a classic sub track like a 15-inch speaker. I mean, you still could. It's not the same thing. The subharmonic synthesizers, they actually make a synth, like they make it's almost like an octave below. So it's a different thing. It's not just sub frequencies. It's actually an octave below, or you can do 2 octaves as well. That one's usually for like sound effects and stuff like that. It gets for bass guitar, it gets too crazy. So it's a different thing. When people send me sessions that they recorded a sub speaker, like a subwoofer, which is basically all the same frequencies, just, it's reproduced better because the speaker's bigger. I sometimes still use a subharmonic synthesizer with it, just depending on what it is. So, okay. Acoustica Audio sampled the Overstayer in their Jam plugin. Yeah, I hate Acoustica Audio. Sorry. Their plugins are almost unusable. I know they sound good, and I've had such bad customer experience with them. I've spent a significant amount of money with their stuff. I can't use it. It's just unreliable. And then when you reach out to them and let them know and ask them to fix stuff, they tell you you should be working on Reaper. And that's not an exaggeration. I literally got an email back from them probably 10 years ago. I had to recall a mix, and I couldn't get the mix to play, even though the mix was done. I had to recall it. I'd printed a mix for somebody else, or not for somebody else. I printed a mix for the client, sent it out. They had a recall. When I recalled it, the session wouldn't play because of one of the Acoustica Audio plugins. And so I reached out to them asking for help, and they said, yeah, the Pro Tools is a bad DAW and doesn't work with plugins very well, and I should use Reaper. I'm like, okay, good to know. That's what should be on the front of your website when people are about to pay $300 for plugins. You should say, only use if you use Reaper. No. All right. Enough talking shit. It's all deserved, but I'll stop talking shit. I don't like to be negative, but yeah, I definitely had a big problem with those guys. Thanks. I have a sub from Mike Plotnikoff, SVT4 Pro, but I will try to add to that. Yeah. Hey, whatever works. Try it all. And what works for you might not work for him and might not work for the other guy and whatever. That's why what's great about what we do is we have all these different tools, and the combinations of the tools ends up being something unique because there's so many different ingredients in the stew per se. It's hard to kind of make it exactly the same as something else if you're introducing all these different variables. So use it all, use none of it. Use a little bit of this, a little bit of that. That's part of the fun. So, all right. This has been great. I love being back and doing this. I know I say this at the end of every one. I'm going to try to do them more often. Just time permitting, schedules permitting, tornadoes permitting, all that fun stuff. So, yeah, but I am going to try to get back on doing this. And then I feel like I dangle lots of carrots, but I'm going to dangle a lot more carrots. I've been thinking about doing a few more interview type live streams, and I have a few people that we've been talking about getting on the live stream to do like more of like an interview thing. And I've decided that I'm actually going to hold off on doing those on the live stream. I've had a podcast concept in the works for years that I've been procrastinating, and I've been kind of like chickening out on a little bit every time I get close to pulling the trigger on them. But I am actually going to pull the trigger on it. I'm putting it out there, and so that way maybe you guys will hold me accountable to do it. I love talking shop. I love talking to people who are passionate about what they do and are good at what they do. And so I've got a big list of guests that I just want to talk to selfishly. I want to have conversations with them. I want to ask them questions. I want to just kind of dig into who they are and what they do and how they do it and all that fun stuff. So stay tuned. It might be something that I start this summer. And make that a very regular thing. So stay tuned for that. And then lastly, I will circle back to kind of where I started everything in case you weren't there right out of the gate. I do have a full production course that's going to be coming out. in the next, I don't know, let's say few months. But it's basically a lot of footage of the entire process of me going into a studio and recording a song with a band. Um, Everything from pre-production to editing to mixing to mastering. I didn't do the mastering. I had an amazing mastering engineer do the mastering and had a little interview segment with him for that. But it's basically the entire segment it's basically the entire process of the whole production process. And one of the cool, unique things that we're going to be doing as part of the offering for the course is having a kind of like a semesters that will have a limited group, but if you sign up for them once it's available, when a semester opens, you start the course and you work through it with the other people who are doing it, obviously on your own time. But once every couple of weeks, we all jump on a video call together and talk about what you learned, go over questions, clarifications, all that fun stuff, share ideas. And so it's going to be a really cool thing that I think is going to be really educational and really um, enlightening for all of us. So keep an eye out for that. If you're not subscribed to my newsletter, because that's how you're going to find out about that when it's available, head on over to the website, chrisbaseford.com, and sign up for the newsletter. I think there's a link in the description below. And unless there's any other questions, as they say, au revoir. We'll see you next time.